This is going to be one of the best things that you have used in your garden if you have trouble getting your direct sown seeds to germinate. Yes, a humble board. Who would have thought? So one of the problems when you're direct sowing seeds is if it is a small seed, like carrot seeds or even cucumber seeds, and it's not rainy out, and especially if it's windy or hot where it's gonna dry out the surface of your soil fast, these little seeds are so small, you're only sowing them about the same depth as the seed itself, which means the top ½ inch of your soil is gonna dry out relatively quickly. And when you wanna get your seeds to germinate, it's essential that they stay moist, because if they are moist and they just start to sprout and then they dry out, it doesn't matter if you get it wet again, if it's fully dried out, it stops the germination or it stops the sprouting process. And that's when you have seeds that you've planted and they just never begin to grow in the ground. So of course, you could run a sprinkler all the time, but that's not very effective. What we need to do is to be able to keep them moist. So after direct sowing these seeds and planting them, if you place a board on top, that's going to help the moisture from evaporating, and it's going to trap it down there. It's going to block the wind, if you've got a lot of wind, which we're pretty breezy right now, from drying this out. Now, as soon as your seeds start to germinate, of course, then you're going to need to remove this board, because the seeds are not going to be able to grow, the plants are not going to be able to grow if they have a board on top of them. So you only put the board down on top of where you've planted the seeds just until those seeds begin to sprout. So you're going to want to come out and check it after the first couple of days to make sure your seeds haven't started to sprout. And as soon as you see one start to sprout, then of course you're going to pull this board off. So you can see where I've had this board down. We haven't watered for 2 days here. We haven't had any rain. And this is still really nice and moist, all of this soil that's underneath this board. Usually it's going to take at least 4 to 5 days, sometimes up to 10 days, depending upon soil temperature, before your seeds will germinate and start to sprout. So after it's been about 3 to 4 days, you can come out, and I don't see any that have broken the surface yet, but you can just brush back the surface of the soil. And there I see one of my cucumber seeds. It hasn't sprouted yet, so I'm going to cover that back up. And then go ahead and put this board back. But as soon as I start to see green, then we'll be pulling this board off. In order for this technique to work, you do want to make sure that if you have any mulch on top, that gets pulled back first. So anytime you're direct sowing, you want to be doing that directly into the soil, not into any type of barky or thick mulch. Then you want to make sure that it is relatively level and flat, because the way this works is the board needs to be in contact with the soil so that it doesn't evaporate and dry out very fast. So after we've got it level, then I'm going to come through and make a shallow planting trench where I'm actually going to be planting my seeds. General rule of thumb is whatever size of seed you are planting, you usually want to plant it 1 to 2 times the depth of that seed. So cucumber seeds are kind of small, but they're not nearly as small as something like, say, a lettuce seed or a Brussels sprout seed. So we just want to make sure that you have a shallow trench to put them in. It doesn't need to be super deep. I happen to be planting pickling cucumbers. I've got the Boston pickling cucumber, and one of the things with this is you do want to make sure that you are sowing them. If you're doing it against it like I am here, I like to trellis and do vertical planting for our cucumbers, that you're not sowing them so close to the trellis that you're not going to be able to get the board up close to where you've planted them and laying down flat. Now it's time to lightly cover these back up with just a little bit of soil, and then we're going to get our board. So we're just going to place our board directly over where we have just sown our seeds. And then the goal here is just to make sure that the board is flat. So we pre-flatten the surface area, but
I'm going to be taking some of the soil if I see any gaps and just lightly bringing it up onto it. It's not so much that I'm wanting to apply pressure to the soil, but that I'm making sure the board is in contact with the soil on all of the sides so that it doesn't dry out, because your seeds will not germinate if they dry out. Time to check our seed germination. The board has been on these for 5 days, and you can see we have sprouting. As soon as you see sprouting, it is time to take that board off, and this is just 3 days after removing the board. You can see they have been to receive light, so they're turning nice and bright green and are quickly growing. So pretty soon we will have mature cucumber plants here, and I cannot wait to get the very first cucumber off of these plants. Shout out to my friend Seth Smith, who was the first one who shared this with me when I was complaining about my direct sow seeds drying out in our extra hot weather.
So that is a way to help keep the soil nice and moist and perfect growing conditions for your direct sowing without having to have the water on all the time.